We'll start with the emergency evacuation announcement. In the event of fire or other emergency, please exit the building in an orderly manner to the assembly point, which is located in the market car park. The fire exit in this room is indicated by a green fire exit sign. Please do not delay the evacuation by collecting any belongings. Do not use the lift. The premises must not be re-entered until the fire brigade have given the all clear. Please note, it is against the law to smoke on these premises, and this meeting, please note, will be audio recorded. So do we have any item 1? Apologies for absence. Councillor Dray being substituted by Councillor Hazelwood. That's
correct.
Any others? No. Non-members attending? None. Minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of December 2016. Are we happy to agree those? Agreed. Any declarations of interest? None. Any questions on notice? None. Item 6, motions on notice. There are none. Item 7, External Auditor Report, Certification of Claims and Returns Annual Report 2015-16. And that is to consider the report with the Section 151 officer drawing members' attention to the grants claim and return certification 2015/1, report from the Council's External Auditor for 2015-16 EY. And I think that's...
Yeah. Me. So,
you.
Good evening everyone, thank you Chair. I'll immediately pass this to my colleague on the right. This is Chris Hewitt from Ernst & Young, so welcome. And I'm going to pass this to Chris because he completed the work and should be able to explain it fully, and then we can answer questions as we go through.
Okay, thank you, good evening. I'll just give a bit background to the report and just to cover the main issues from it without going into the detail of the report itself. I'm happy to take questions afterwards. In 2015-16, the Council prepared a grant claim form for housing benefits to the value of nearly £18 million to record the claim to recover from the government in regard to housing benefits expenditure. In line with guidance from the DWP, we certified that grant claim by the deadline of the 30th of November, which we achieved. DWP in its work sets out what the work has to be, and that includes testing a series of cases to a number of cases, or 20 cases across three areas, and then if we find errors on those cases, then we have to do an extra 40 cases on the errors that we find. So that was the background to the report itself. The report summarises the results of the certification work, with the key details being on pages 7.7 and 7.8 in your pack. There we just detail the new errors that we found from the work undertaken this year, and our follow-up of those errors that were found by the previous auditors, BDO, in the previous year. The key messages is that from the work that we undertook, is that we didn't identify any errors that required an amendment to the grant claim this year. We did report on one error in our qualification letter to the Department of Work and Pensions, whereby we had to extrapolate for the error that we found. That was to a small sum of £3,000 extrapolation, and we're waiting for the Department of Work and Pensions to provide a report to us, or to come back to the Council to say what further action they want to do in that case, which is the normal course of events. And from the work that we undertook, we've identified several areas for next year where we're going to ask the Council to do early work, to do early testing on extended testing of 40 cases. That will help in advancing the work that we have to do next year. The final issue I want to highlight is the fee on page 7.9. This is quite low for a district council, and the reason for this is the work that's done by internal audit in doing the initial testing of those 20 cases I mentioned earlier on our behalf, and we then reperform an element of those to check that we agree with the conclusions the internal auditors have reached. And by doing that work, that helps keep the fee low. And for next year, the fee again is in the region of £8,500. So that's the key messages from the claims. So I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, thank you. It's just about the manual adjustments on which you found an error. Can you just explain why manual adjustments are needed, and what quantity there might be in the course of a month or a year?
Is this the manual?
Sorry, page 7.7. We've referred to recommendations for 14-15 and then findings in 15-16, where there were no errors in the follow-up review, but it's just referring to manual adjustments made on a monthly basis to confirm accuracy of input, and I'm just wondering what the manual adjustments might be for, why they are needed to be made, and how common is it amongst district councils for manual adjustments to be made. Is it because the calculations are quite right? I assume it's not just inputting data. I assume this is a manual adjustment to provide a different figure to the figure provided.
Yes, there are two reasons why manual adjustments can occur. And it is a common practice in councils that we come across, and it is something that we check at councils. The first one is where during the year sometimes the system does not record all the information that's required, and checks that the council officers do come up with that there's a manual adjustment has to be made, and the list of those are kept by the council, which we then are able to check, and that's the same at all councils. These are something that we look at, and I think also there was one element of an error that we found whereby the start date for a claim had been adjusted. For whatever reason, and we can pick that up from the system, and on checking that data, that also revealed an error. But these are common issues that we find at councils.
Okay. You say that we as a council keep a record of the claim, and you check a record of the manual adjustment, and you check those. If there was no record kept of the manual adjustment, would you know that there had been a manual adjustment?
There is.
Or would that come out in another part of the audit, potentially on the sampling basis?
It's a good question. I think that the issue is that the council has systems in place to record those adjustments as it has.
And you have faith in those systems?
We have faith in the systems.
Yeah.
We reviewed the controls that were there to do that.
Thank you.
Are you happy with?
I think so, yes. I can't be unhappy, can I?
Oh, no.
Thank you.
I have an answer.
You have an answer, yeah. Anybody else got any other questions? No? So can we go to the recommendation then? So it's proposed that the committee resolves that the certification of claims and returns annual report 2015-16 be noted. Is that agreed? Right, item 8, 2016-17 external audit plan report. And that's to consider the report of the Section 151 officer presenting the Council's external auditor's annual audit plan covering the audit of the 16-17 accounts and certification of claims and returns. And that's...
Again, thank you, Chair, and again I will pass over to Chris, because this is the external audit plan that we have reviewed and gone through and approved from my point of view. So I'll ask again Chris to pull out the salient points.
Okay, thank you. Yes, this audit plan then sets out our proposed work for the 2016-17 audit, covering the audit of the financial statements and our arrangements that to look at the council's arrangements for value for money. The key elements of the plan are on section 2, which is on page 8.7, I think. This sets out the key risk areas. Again, these three this year are standard to most councils, and the first two represent where there's scope maybe for management to manipulate controls. We have no evidence of this at Rochford, to make that clear to the start. But our but it is our auditing standards which direct us into these areas. So it says that we have to test these areas in particular to check there's no risks that appear. So these include the review of revenue, and particularly to check whether expenditure is not being capitalised when it should actually be revenue. And the second area is management override of controls itself, where we test journal entries, look at estimates, look at unusual transactions throughout testing throughout the audit. So these are standard, would be in all audit plans, and are not peculiar to Rochford in itself. The third area I've listed there is an other risk that we're addressing this year, and this arises because CIPFA have specified in its code of practice on accounting of local government a new presentation of income and expenditure in the financial statements, and this is quite a large change. CIPFA and ourselves EY have given national training on this to local councils, and we'll be taking an early review of the work produced by the finance team to have their first look at this presentational change, so that we can give an early opinion on it before the financial statements are produced. The next section.
Can I just jump in there, just if you don't mind? So just to clarify what that actually means. And some of you remember seeing the accounts year on year. They're actually quite complex to read, certainly the income and expenditure statement. And even from my point of view, you look and go, how does that relate to all the information we tell you throughout the year on you, things like your outturn and expenditure? There was never really, there was a link clearly because the numbers were there, but there were so many accounting entries in there that actually you could never relate the two. It was quite difficult to do. So what CIPFA have agreed now is that we will start to think about how, so the same way we present things like the outturn and the budget report to council, that's the same way now that the accounts will be presented. So the top part will be as you'd expected to see it. Our net budget is 10 million. And then underneath that, you'll see all the accounting entries, ins and outs, that will then get us to what we call our income and expenditure line. So it's a very visual way to be able to say, okay, I understood that, I've been told that all the way through the year, I can understand that. And then you can see the accounting entries and get into that. Whereas previous years, it's all been a mix and it's actually quite complex. It almost felt it was done that way to be able to hide things. Absolutely. So by them removing this thing called CIRCOP, it's going to make life a lot easier for our accounting entries and a lot easier to explain it as well. So we're hoping it's actually quite a positive thing for us as well. So the early work with EY is to sort of test our approach to it, to make sure we're going quite well with it, and then make sure we fit the rules long before we actually close the account. So. Okay. Sorry, I thought I'd just
thank you.
Thanks for that.
Okay.
Is it going to cost more?
It's actually less time for us to do, so to be honest, it's better.
Thank you.
Yes, so the next section is on section 3, which is to do with the value for money conclusion. There we have two significant risks that we've raised in that, which we'll be focusing our work on this year in our value for money work. One is the theme that we looked at last year, which covers the financial position of the authority. In that, I think I've recorded the budget gap at 3.5 million by 2021. That's before the medium-term financial plan was drafted. I believe that figure would now be 2.1 million.
That's right. Yep.
Again, it's a question of we'll do the same work that we did last year, look at the assumptions behind the budget, the council's approach in maintaining services, looking at performance measures as well in terms of how the council has performed in terms of the financial difficulties it is addressing, And saving plans and concepts are in place as well, and looking how robust those are. The second element there is to do with the local authority trading company that Rochford has established. And there, just our focus really is this year is just on the governance arrangements themselves, and just satisfying ourselves that in terms of the advice that the council took in setting up the company and the arrangements as they look, and just giving us an early view as to whether there's any issues that we need to be aware of and consider. Just the three further elements I just need to draw to your attention are the paragraph on materiality at 8.13, where we set out what level of materiality we're working to at this present time. That can change because when we get the final accounts, we update our materiality level and we'll report the final figure to you in our audit results report at the end of the year. At 8.15 and 16, there's no independence issues that I need to draw to your attention. And at 8.17, the audit fee is 47,657. Although on that there may be, in terms of our audit work, some extra fee may be involved depending on the net amount of work we have to do in looking at the new presentational arrangements for the accounts. Otherwise, those are the key items on the audit plan. So again, I'm happy to take questions on the plan.
Councillor Moy.
Thank you. Don't panic too much. I'm just going to say two words and then carry on. I know what I'm going to refer to is exempt, but I can refer to the words Project Wyvern, and it's in relation, because that is in the public domain, and item 3, value for money risks. Will you and have you access to the exempt papers for that, and will that form part of your value for money risk? Because obviously that would, in the medium term, form part of the, not savings as such, but possibly income generation to close the gap. I don't expect you to go into detail because it is exempt, but I just want to make understand that you're aware of it, and will it or will it not be part of what you're doing?
Yes, we are aware of it. We have discussions with the Planning Director and Rob as well. So in those general terms, I'm aware of the project. We have access to all reports that are issued by the council and can request exempt reports. In terms of looking at savings concepts, if that's part of it, then that's things we will be aware of and taking note of.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was the question.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Page 812, use of specialists. My experience of use of specialists is that they are always going to be expensive. There's no indication, obviously, of anticipated expenditure there. I fully understand that. But is there a level at which you would come back to us to get approval for on the use of specialists?
Yes, in terms of the specialists that are highlighted in the report, these again would be in all audit plans, or I expect them to see them in all audit plans. These are normal course of event specialists that we use. In terms of the pensions, the National Audit Office engages PwC to review the actuaries used by councils, and our pensions team review that report done by PwC. This is all covered in the audit fee, so there's no further cost to the council on that basis. And it's just the same on the property, plant and equipment. The difference is if we do find an error in the accounts, and that error we think is that we would have to resolve that through extra specialist work. In that instance, there would be an extra fee, and we would have to discuss that with the Section 151 officer in the first instance.
Okay, so to clarify, your fees at the moment, presuming you don't find any mistakes, cover the use of the specialist?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
So you're happy with that?
Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
It's just a bit of a question, being relatively new to this. I noticed the expression entity-wide controls. Now, in entity-based programming in your accounting system, Do I take it then that if a piece of money goes through and it's apportioned a certain way and there's an entry, that you can actually track that as part of the larger sum? Because all entities, like you're an entity, I'm an entity, the asset of this building is and so on. So is that how that would work? Is that part of the improvement that we now have being able to perhaps follow an expenditure through the system better, which could be in bits and pieces all over the ledger?
We should be able to do that anyway, so any good financial system should be able to do that, but ours specifically can. So any money that comes into the council, the minute it comes into the organisation, we track it, and then we know exactly where it's going to go. And obviously any movements that are outside of the system are called a journal, and that would be run by Matt and team, and actually there's a log for those, so we know exactly where it's gone and why it's gone there as well. So yes, absolutely. Whether that's what that means in this context, I'm not entirely sure. Chris, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, entity level controls in our terms means we're talking basically the whole controls that the council has in place generally in the council. This can cover, it's a wide-ranging term that we look at in terms of our planning, dealing with, for instance, risk management, human resources, and it's the controls at a wider scale the council has that we take note of in terms of deciding whether the overall control environment is sound or not, or whether there's a risk for us to address. That's what we mean in terms of entity level controls.
As a local government officer in the dinosaur age before computers, when I had to work out all the ratios between everything and expenditures for our engineers and surveyors for everything they did, and that was always done on paper, because this is a much more convenient system and much more trackable. I just thought, as we
like I say, in the systems we have now, every penny is tracked constantly. So at any point we can go into a live system, we can see exactly where it's come from, who put it there, and follow it right through to the entity.
I wouldn't have expected to have heard anything else.
But he says that should work. That should work.
Thank you. And Councillor FD.
With item 8 appendix with lacto, will that, as it's a limited liability trading company which is owned by us but is slightly separate, will we always be paying for the audits on that, or will they eventually take over, pay for their own audits, or will they give the council some money to pay for the audits?
I can answer that one, Chair. That's okay. Green Gateway Trading will pay for any audits of their own. The directors of the company deemed that an audit wasn't necessary for the first 4 months of trading, given it wasn't even half a year's trading. But I would think for the next full financial year that they will have an audit, but they will be covering their own costs.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you. Can you just remind me, 8.17 please, what the extra fee was used for, the extra £5,000?
I'll let you answer this one, Chris, as well, if you can justify it. We had quite a bit of to and fro.
And waiting approval in that case as well.
Yes, the fee, in terms of what the extra fee comprised of, it was we set that out in our audit results report from September, and the key elements of it included the extra work around the value for money conclusion that we did last year in terms of internal audit, where we had a qualification to our value for money work. So there was some element in that caused extra work. The second element of it, and these were itemised into 3 separate sums, and I produced a paper for Rob to consider in that element. The second element consisted of there were some delays in working papers coming to us. So when we tried to advance the audit, we couldn't advance the audit because there was delays in working papers coming to us in then getting the information back, which extended the audit slightly. And the third element was to do with there was a technical issue regarding £400,000 and where that how that had flowed through the accounts, and we had to call in that case, expert advice to help us from our financial technical team to help us resolve that issue, and calling that an advice, and the extra work that involved was the main part of the reason for the extra fee. Okay, thank you.
Any further questions?
Sorry, Chairman, can I just come back on one of the answers that was given by Matt regarding audits of the LATCO? Given the fact, would that be part of the value of money audit work that the external accountants do? Because I'd be rather concerned that the LATCO thinks it needs to do an audit. I know it's up to the directors to consider whether or not they do need an audit, but I might be quite concerned if they think they do need an audit, considering the size of it and the fact that if external accountants are producing the accounts for them ultimately, then they have a responsibility on producing their report to say that the accounts are true and fair. I think audit may be overkill, and I'm wondering if that's something that would be looked at by the external auditors.
I think it's the issue. The first issue is obviously if they're going to be group accounts or not, and how they feature in the accounts at the moment. Because the one issue will be as to whether the accounts get consolidated into the Rochester District Council's accounts, and what element that will be, what stage that will be. We've asked the Finance Department to look at that this year and to see whether the impact on that. I think the issue then is whether the company has its own auditors. Is that what you mentioned? In which case, it depends under which remit they fall under in terms of the audit, whether it's a Companies Act or not.
Yeah, so my understanding is obviously Council has been involved in the project team of Green Gateway, but the three directors of Green Gateway Trading this year deemed that an audit wasn't necessary. But my understanding, as Councillor Hoy has just said, is that it will be their decision next year whether an audit will be required. But until they know the level of turnover as we go through the year, I guess that might be a bit of a moving target.
I think we can probably take away the point that actually let's get them to consider it on a value for money basis. Actually, is it money wasted doing an audit on what could be quite a small turnover? But fortunately, I hope Green Gateway really does take off. Maybe it would be worthwhile auditing in the first year and then see how we go from there. So it's something we can consider. We need to sit with EY more and have a chat.
I think it needs to be considered more fully exactly on a value for money basis. If an audit provides value or not. An audit can provide value without doubt, but they can be very expensive for a small business and not add a lot of value.
And that will be, no doubt, their decision, and they will look at all the fors and against.
Absolutely. Yeah. But we'll make sure we push for that as well.
Okay. Any? Happy with that? So again, this is one. We're noting, aren't we? Yes, can be noted. We noted that. Item 9. To consider the proposed 2017-18 audit plan, which is presented to members for their consideration and approval. So,
thank you, Chair. Yes, good evening, everyone. This relates to the internal audit plan, just to draw this distinction between the item just previously discussed. So this is the internal audit proposal for the work to be carried out during the year 17-18. Under the National Internal Auditing Standards, the internal audit team is required to produce an audit plan which is based on risk and which links its proposed work to the council's identified risks to its delivery of its business objectives. So as you'll see in Appendix 1, that is how the plan is configured under the headings under each corporate risk and linking the audits to be undertaken to the business priority to which they relate. This plan, it needs to be approved by the committee following its challenge whether they believe it's sufficiently focused, it's sufficient in coverage to provide them the assurance that it needs as part of its ongoing remit, as part of its terms of reference, and specifically as part of its role to approve the annual governance statement at year end, so the year ending in March 18. So the question being, will this plan, if it's delivered, provide you with the insight that you need as a key source of assurance to sign off the annual governance statement? The specified audits within the audit plan were identified through consultative interviews with all assistant directors, the managing director and executive director. It's also influenced by an assessment which internal audit take of a number of facets to establish the relative importance of an activity of the council for coverage by internal audit. And those facets are set out in paragraph 3.1 on 9.2. So for instance, they include the financial significance of the income and expenditure that flows through the activity, how important it is perceived by the public in terms of their satisfaction, whether it's a key process as part of the business as usual running of the council, whether it's got legal statutory backing, for instance. So they're set out there. So it's a process which then identifies the key areas for coverage. And like I say, its main objective is to also provide the head of internal audit with sufficient evidence to come to an overall conclusion at the end of the year 17-18 on the operation of the council's governance arrangements, its risk management arrangements and its series of internal control. So I believe that this plan will provide that sufficient evidence, if delivered, for the head of internal audit to come to their annual opinion, and also for the audit committee to use it as a source of key assurance when coming to its decision whether or not to approve the annual governance statement as part of the final accounts process. Happy to take some.
Thank you. Any questions on?
Sorry, I was
Why
maybe
am I
something
not
else.
surprised?
Sorry, they're not horrible questions. I just like to understand things a little bit more. That's all. And maybe express some concerns. On page 9.5 of item 9 appendix, I'll start with contract management. Contracts that will be reviewed in 17-18 are leisure services, IT support services, waste management, street scene. The first three of those must be our three biggest contracts. I'm not sure if street scene would be our fourth biggest. I'm not sure it would be. But the first three certainly are our three biggest. I'm just slightly concerned that that's taken on rather a lot. I know it says review. How in-depth is the review? We're looking to see if they're well managed and if they're being complied with, but I think that's probably quite a lot of work for at least two of them, and IT support services will presumably be a new contract next year as well. And also with leisure services, I think there's probably there'll be 4 years left on it, then 3 years. I think it's 2020 or 2021. That ceases. I'm just a bit concerned about it might be too much work.
Okay, that's a good question, and it's something we take on board, and in the scoping of any audit we can decide to focus on particular elements of the contract in terms of what we deem the most important contract clauses or the most important arrangements. It can be a deep dive, or it can be questions mainly focused at what the management know, what then assess the management arrangements, what they're doing to manage the contract and what comes across their desk to give them assurance, as opposed to actually going out for internal audit to come into its own conclusions of is there evidence of the compliance. So the scoping of the work can be it can enable those, and I believe we have got the time in the plan. We've done the resource assessment in terms of the number of staff days to cover off those 4 contracts. And what from coming out of the audit of contract management this year, we have the recommendations that we made, particularly around I think the environmental services at the first instance, was for the environmental services staff who manage contracts to develop almost a protocol or an approach, a systematic method for them to say this is how we will assess what the most important parts of those contracts are for us to manage. And therefore our approach could be, has that protocol been rolled out across the waste and street scene, for instance? And so that will be it's not a shortcut in terms of cutting corners of audit work, but it's the basis of which will get us to a point of understanding whether that contract is being well managed very quickly. Because what we're asking management is always to show as well, what are the significant risks to delivering that contract, and how do they know that those are being managed to a reasonable level? So it's a question of management rather for the internal audit to go out and do some in-depth studies. So for instance of, like leisure centres, whether to actually go out into the leisure centres and confirm whether or not those clauses are being complied with. It's always a question of management. How do management know? So it can be, in short, we do have the resources because we've done the assessment and we can make we can cover off those.
Right.
But they won't be, it's a good point in terms of perhaps how it's worded in terms of managing expectations and being very clear on the assurance that you will get from that. It won't be a hugely in-depth confirmation that all of the clauses in the contract are being complied with. It will be an assessment of, do management understand what the most important parts of that contract is, and do they have sufficient evidence to demonstrate to us quite quickly as interested third parties to say, show us how you know the resource that you've got is best focus and the council gets what it needs to out of that contract.
Might that take a bigger focus on a contract which might be nearing the end of its life, where it might be more important if we want to, as a council, enforce maybe terms which would uphold the integrity of buildings, for instance, that we'd look at those much perhaps more closely than a contract nearer the beginning of its life?
And that's a really good point, and that's the questions we'd ask the management in terms of what do you see as the risks from this contract, and in particular the contract that's winding down has a particular set of risks that aren't replicated in the contract which is just mobilising, for instance. So that's a question we'd ask, but be informed by those inherent risks. Yes, that's a really good point, and that's one we will ask.
Yeah. And could I just ask, Chairman, if it says throughout the year is the timing, would we be getting, I don't expect detailed reports, but this would be updated to say, to bring us any points throughout the year, so each of the audit meetings there would be information. I'm just asking those people particularly because they're quite critical to our being financially self-sufficient. If there's a risk anywhere, it's a risk in those not being as good as they could be.
On each one of those, isn't there, every single day?
Yeah.
So yes, in terms of looking at them, there's 4 of them and envisaged in 1 quarter being complete. So throughout the year, you should see coming in the regular progress reports, the findings from that audit.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I know it's quite a long time, that one. This isn't a question necessarily for you. I just want the understanding how. Because also on 9.6 you'll be looking at becoming financially self-sufficient under that code 42. Will that, which is almost over robust governance, oversight and performance management for that code, which I think is almost exactly the same as the external audit was going to look at. That would presumably feed into the external auditors to some extent.
We would certainly be happy to share the results of that work and any detailed workings that we did. It's clearly a risk for the external auditors for their opinion, and it's clearly a risk for the head of internal audit as well. They need to come to their own opinion on that as well. So yes, there will be a level of joint coverage of it, but we'd hope that there would be, we would work to ensure that there'll be that flow of information and assurance and external audit where there are standards and operating processes allowed, so can rely on the work that internal audit has completed.
Okay, thanks. And finally, I thought, just jumping back again to 9.5, procurement, timing Q4. I'm sure we had concerns about procurement last year. I think I and other members have had concerns about our procurement procedures and policies, and I'm just wondering why it's Q4 rather than Q1. Is that purely how you're allocating people? Is that when, is it to be finished by Q4?
That's when we hope to bring an opinion to bear. It's time towards the latter part of the year, due to the recent audit has just been finalised, and therefore there's a number of actions that were agreed as recommendations in train. We want to give the services the opportunity to implement those actions, and there's wider action going on, I think, to possibly look at contract procedure rules itself to refresh them. So I think the way that a number of activities line up, it will be it makes more sense practically for us to come along later in the year to make sure we've got a view on whether the previously identified improvement actions have actually been embedded effectively, because that's also key, isn't it, for us, in terms of people can take on an improvement action as a recommendation, but really is there evidence that it's made its way to business as usual, that this happens procurement happens. So we need a period of time since the previous audit to allow that view to be taken.
Fair enough. Thank you, Chairman. That's it.
Yeah. I think my question has been answered, but I mean, I was going to ask about procurement because it does link very heavily to item 11 on our agenda tonight. Really, I was just asking how far we've actually got along with that, but I think you've answered that pretty completely. Thank you.
Further questions now? Thank you. So can we resolve that the proposed 2017-18 audit plan be approved? Agreed. Item 10. Review of the Council's corporate risk management policy and framework for 2017-18. And that's to consider the report of the Section 151 officer presenting a review and proposed update of the Council's risk management policy and framework and corporate risk register for 17-18. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so what you have in front of you is a report into two parts. First of all is the risk management policy and framework, and I believe this was worked on and created by my predecessor Denise Murray, and it's pretty much unchanged this year. We don't propose any particular changes to that. What this does, it outlines how a risk policy, how risk should be recognised, how it should be reported and how it should be managed, the various roles and responsibilities we each have as officers and even down to members as well. And then it's got later on a bit on how the process works in terms of the individual risk registers and project logs, how that feeds up into the strategic risk register and then into the risk log that I'm presenting to you today. So from that first point of view, the policy and the framework hasn't changed this year. We didn't feel the need to. It all, touch wood, seems to be working fairly well. So I'll then move on to the second part, which is then the actual risk register. So if I can draw your attention to, please, page 10.12. So what we have here is our corporate risk dashboard, and as you can see, it's got our now 14 risks. We've actually added one this year, and then on the right hand side the impacts, and then things like the likelihood, impact and risk rating. So as part of the framework, we have a very defined element how we determine things like likelihood and impact, so we can actually measure properly. This is not subjective, this is quite formulaic almost to follow. Now the one I want to draw your attention to initially is this risk number 3, the serious food or health and safety, environmental or other incident which the council would be culpable for. Now, as you know, there's been previous years there's been issues with this particular risk, and it's been around the food element of that, around the food inspections and the issues that have happened there. and you'll note it's still high. Now I'm pleased to say, in one ways, that the underlying element of this, the food part of it, has now been addressed, and that has been rated as good. The controls are fairly good. There's a new team in place, or a new FTE. Louisa has restructured her team to make this work. So the food element of it is now turned good. So I'd love to have seen that to move to a lower risk. But unfortunately, we've also identified this year we've had some issues with some of the health and safety of our staff. So what happened was, throughout, if I get the months right, I think it was about through the summer basically, we did quite a big audit on some of our health and safety practices, and it came out there was quite a few poor controls, should I say, around some of the corporate health and safety assessments that were happening. We now have a full-time health and safety person, I believe. Yes. Yeah. Which has come in, and actually it's that person coming in that said, hold on a minute, there's quite a few things here we need to deal with. So officers and the organisation are now moving ahead with that to try and address some of these issues. Starting with, at the moment, there's quite a big training programme, isn't there, being rolled out over the next few months to all starting the leadership team and then moving down on health and safety training, make sure the assessments are done properly, and how do we really understand what's going on. So in terms of a risk, the risk looks high and it hasn't changed, but it's the food element has got better, but the health and safety bit, I wouldn't say it's got worse, but I think there's just now been a focus on it. That's the difference.
I think this was something that the audit committee did identify in previous meetings, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We raised this because we were worried about the potential risks, health and safety and the food risks. But I'm pleased to hear you say that the food side of things have improved, because that was a considerable concern for this group. Yeah. Okay. Any questions?
No, I'll carry on this. Just
no.
More bits, but
Sorry, no. I'll do it at the end.
Okay. It's just if there's anything else. So obviously the other one I'd like to bring your attention to then is the final risk 14, which is new, which is the risk on our ICT estate. So this is our new IT system. So as you know, we are currently going through a migration to a cloud-based system. I think it would be completely inappropriate if we didn't put it on here as a risk, because it's such a huge undertaking for us. As any organisation in this day and age now knows, IT is the backbone of everything we do. We get that wrong, we're going to be in trouble. So for me, wholeheartedly, this needs to be on there as a risk and needs to be monitored very, very carefully. As you know, we've got a project team up and running. We've got Sean Scrutton, who's actually, our chief exec or managing director, is leading that project. That shows the emphasis and the importance of that project. And so he's keeping an eye on what's going on. I'm getting regular updates on what's going on with the project, and I believe members are being reasonably kept abreast, I hope, anyway. So it is something we are absolutely keeping an eye on, and I think we'll certainly keep it on the risk register for the rest of this year until hopefully the migration happens sort of between April and June, and then we can start to see that we've got the new system in place and the risk can actually reduce considerably. That's what I wanted to draw attention to. Now, that's...
Just first of all, just a point on risk 3. Is it worth splitting that up into two sections? Because obviously there's two different things going on here. And having looked at the table, I've obviously picked out there's issues, but it's moved and it doesn't really get reflected on a...
Do you know, I think it's not a bad point actually. I think we should do that. Yeah, I take that on board. Good.
My other
If we do that as a change to recommendations, we can, certainly.
Yes, and that would then identify that the food risk is improved.
We can do that. I don't see why not.
I'd be happy with that. Thank you for bringing that in.
My only other comment really is around risk number 10, which obviously is quite serious in terms of looking at the chart at the back of the document. Obviously that's probably the highest risk. Having attended the recent workshop around the staff survey, obviously that's feeding into this, I presume, in terms of action being taken.
Yes.
I guess just value your thoughts really in terms of that still seems to be quite a
I'll be
serious
honest,
risk.
I think that one and the one above it on the MTFS will always be higher. I think as an organisation of this size, as Rochford is, and its location to London, we do struggle to keep talent. We can't pay London wages, let's be honest. So we're always going to struggle against that. It's always going to be a risk. But obviously, the best thing we can do is try and offer what other benefits we can: a great working environment, plenty of opportunities, things like that. The other side of it is, the steps we've taken this year in terms of we have increased the budget slightly for our staffing as we recognised in 17-18, we added about £200,000 to £300,000 in to recognise there are areas under extreme pressure at the moment, so we're trying to relieve that pressure valve slightly. That's going to help mitigate some of this risk. But again, I'll be honest, I would always want to keep this as high up on our agenda, because I think the minute we take our eye off the ball on this, we'll start to see the people walking out the door or staff morale dropping, and then our efficiency goes out the window. So.
Any further questions? Oh, Councillor Hine.
Yeah, there's only one left now on this one. Sorry, I can't find it. Page 10.13, safeguarding. We're referring to current risk. Is any assessment made of historic risk?
Not in this.
Which may come to light.
Oh. I think that's a difficult question to answer. I think, I mean, all we can do at the moment and say that the controls we have in place now are good. Is there a risk that actually we're going to have, like you say, historic claims against us? I think that's potential. All we can do is go back and look at the previous reviews of our safeguarding controls, go back to as far as we can, and start to see if we thought they was adequate at the time or whether we had any shortage. I think it's a difficult one to answer, because it's a bit like how long is a piece of string. We don't know, to be honest with you. And it also comes back to things like HR policy and HR risk. So if safeguarding in the same guise as if you think of a staff member that maybe left a few years ago, they could still be a claim, we think is completely settled, it's never occurred, but actually they've come up with something that we were never even aware of. So I suppose it's for us to try and balance out where do we think the risk is now, where do we think our controls are now, but still potentially recognise there could be historic claims, but the answer is we won't know. I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
Okay, thanks.
We can't change what's happened in the past.
Yeah, and I think the problem is you can end up really
deal with it as it comes along.
Yeah. I'd certainly, I think it's a question to be asked to say, actually, do we think we were ever, we had a bit of a shortfall in any of these risks or anything else previously? We may now be good, but just to keep an eye on. I suppose that's a question we can ask. Yeah, certainly.
1020, principal impacts or consequences. One of the items you've got listed down here is an increasing propensity of compensation claims to result in additional costs and inefficient use of resources. What's the trend on that at the moment? Are we experiencing a lot of compensation claims at all across the council?
I don't think we are. Compensation claims.
About halfway down.
Generally. I don't think we...
It's not an issue that, generally speaking, we need to be worried about.
It's not something that seems to come across my desk often, no, I must admit. I don't think I've had any while I've been here nearly a year now, so it's certainly not, there's nothing brewing underneath, no, certainly not.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
Just like to raise one point.
Yeah.
I'm probably looking when not seeing, but you have a column, quality of controls, with an asterisk.
Ah, okay.
What does the asterisk mean?
Now you're asking, I'm going to go and find out myself.
Typing error.
10.24. 10.24.
Oh yeah, 10.28, yeah. There we go.
Oh, right, thank you. Yeah, that's on.
Yeah, 10.24, there we go. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We happy with this? Thank you for that. So it's proposed that the committee resolves 1, that the updated corporate risk management policy and framework be approved, and 2, that the content of the corporate risk register for 2017-18 be noted.
With the one particular change?
With the change to item 3 is split, risk 3 is split into 2, yeah? Are we happy with that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, item 11. To Consider the report of the Assistant Director, Democratic Services, which draws members' attention to completed audit engagements and provides an update of audit recommendations.
Thank you, Chair.
You're doing this one, so.
Good evening again. Every committee we bring a report summarising the progress and the outcomes of the work completed in the quarter just finished. So it's a standard report. It gives an insight into the percentage of the audit plan completed versus where we expect to be at this stage. That's in reference to the conversation that we had in this committee in December, I don't know what month it was, about where the committee asked to have some indication of whether the audit plan is on track to be delivered. That's set out on 11.1 in paragraph 3.2, where we put a figure of we're 86% to where we'd expect to be to complete the work, and that the slippage, the gap, is primarily due to the work undertaken that is unplanned. It's not included in the internal audit plan, which is part of the wider corporate role that the principal auditor has in regard to investigating officer role, which supports investigations, not fraud investigations in this case, but they can be staffing matters such as disciplinaries, grievances, etc. So we're just slightly off, but in terms of confidence and still ability to undertake and complete sufficient work by the end of, say, by the time of the June audit committee, I'm still confident there will be enough work completed to enable the head of internal audit to have sufficient evidence on which to base their opinion. So that's a key outcome of the whole plan, and that's hopefully gives you some confidence that the audit plan is being delivered. I think it's probably easier to say, actually, so on 11.2 it gives also an update on pieces of work that we say are ongoing, where they're not specific audits, but otherwise are part of the audit plan, which is our wider role. And it also sets out the work that we're doing in relation to developing the council's counter-fraud arrangements, which, as you remember, has also been discussed at previous meetings of this committee. Identified through a number of assessments of against the internal audit standards and the good practice guidance, which relates to counter-fraud arrangements in local government. The Appendix 2 also gives an update on the progress that the council is making in implementing the recommendations that internal audit have made in previous reports. Appendix 1 is probably where the bulk of the report is situated, and this is the summaries of the work completed, setting out the overall audit opinion given for each individual audit, and some background onto why that opinion has been reached, given the findings and the scope of that work. And that's all set out in Appendix 1, which runs from 11.4 to 11.15. And then Appendix 2 is pretty self-explanatory, like I say, giving an update on progress implementing recommendations. Happy to take questions.
Okay, please.
Thank you. Page 11.2, item 3.6. Not expecting you to give anything specific there, but so as we can get a handle on the financial implications of these type of things, how much does that cost the council so far, that particular action?
I don't want to speculate. I don't think it's been put into pounds and pence as yet. It could probably be calculated after the event in terms of by virtue of saying how many staff days have been been taken towards it. Internal audit, we count our days because that's how we manage our resources. And there are other teams that have been involved, presumably HR, the executive director has been involved as he's the hearing officer, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not something that I'm privy to in terms of what everyone else is spending. But
is this something that we will know in due course, the costs? As you put it there as a specific item and quite a defined item, I'm just sort of wondering why it's measured so much if it's going to be a major cost?
It's
then
majored in this report because it's taken up 12 of the principal auditor's days, and therefore those days weren't planned to be spent on that. And so we've had to take away from a planned piece of work that was in the audit plan to focus on this.
So it's more of a time issue than cost?
Indeed, for us. It is for us because in a sense it's almost like a sunk cost. We would have paid that cost. It's nothing additional to anything that would have been. But like you say, there is a cost to it because everybody could have been doing something else.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Okay. Right. 11.8. Talking about purchase orders. I would assume that purchase orders haven't been insisted on for payment today.
There is a directive, I believe, that one must raise a purchase order. The findings of the audit.
Reading the report, it sounds. Sorry to interrupt, but it does sound as though that hasn't been adhered to.
Yes, that was the finding of the audit. Yes.
So that is the case, is it?
Well, we found from the work that we did, we found that purchase orders weren't being raised in all cases in the manner required. Yes, in relation to either timing against when an invoice was received, etc., etc. Yes. So there was a need. That was that's one of the recommendations that comes out. Yes.
Right. Okay. So is that a management issue or is it just a procedure issue? So it sounds to me like the management aren't actually following through on.
Yeah. It's the recommendation is that there's a greater directive given that we really must make sure all staff involved in raising buying goods and services are very aware that the way it's done, the business is done around here, is that you raise a purchase order before you engage. And then the recommendation was made also that there is focused management oversight of, is this actually happening? How do we improve if there are particular types of things, services or particular areas of the council where it's not happening, and then focusing and with combinations of carrots and sticks improve that.
Okay. One more if I may. 11.13. You've got on there that the business property database is out of date. Now I'm aware that business rates were reviewed last year, so how is that out of date?
Sorry, where I am looking at
11.13.
Second one in the box.
Yeah, it's got limited against it.
Okay, yes, that's the inherent risk against which we would look at. So
it's not the actual case, that's a possible.
in the left column, that is a possible risk, and then by virtue of the limited against it, we're saying yes, there is some evidence to say that the property database isn't complete. Yes. Which
is there any reason why
relating
that should be? Because I was under the impression that the business rates review had been completed last year.
Yeah.
So we should have.
The business rate review is complete, and the VOA, the Valuation Officer database, is up to date. What's the situation here? We identified some properties which we had submitted up to the VOA to put them on. So we had several properties which we had potential to raise billing on, which wasn't there. The up-to-date bit is our end rather than the business rate list.
So whereabouts are we on that?
Talking to the business rate officer, quite well advanced now. We had a situation where we had a temporary business rate officer who then had an operation which went wrong and he was off for about 3 months. So he was plodding along, doing the necessary day-to-day maintenance. We have now employed a full-time business rate officer. The temporary business officer, he's now back and he's in some sort of support to the business rate team, and they're making quite good progress in bringing things up to date.
Percentage-wise, where are we at?
I don't know.
Roughly? No? Okay.
Thank you.
This business of the change of bank account being slipped in, and I'll give any sort of figures for companies who slip in the odd invoice for material that you just never had, but it's sort of in a chain of these things. But obviously, if it doesn't relate back to the purchase order, there's something going wrong there. That's when these things get paid.
If there's no purchase order, then the invoice is not paid. And that's the first one. It has to tie. It has to match to the order. So an invoice without an order will be queried back to the area where it should have come from. We haven't definitely quantified that this year because we identified that there was an issue, and we decided this year that there's an issue, it needs sorting.
That's all right. Okay.
Councillor High.
I'm going to be careful how I ask this question. In relation to, and I can't identify it in the back bit, in relation to business rates, we have significant amounts of income due is not collected. I mean, assurance level adequate, recommendation 1 moderate. I can't see the recommendation in Appendix 2. I don't know if you could point me to which line it relates to, if it is in there at all.
Is this why we've rustled some paper?
If I can give a hypothetical, our Section 151 officer should be aware of the hypothetical question I'm about to ask. He's had an email regarding it, and I can't say any more than that. What do we put in place if, say, someone may have a limited company which they rent a building through, and the company may go broke after 9 months and not pay any business rates, and obviously there's no way to collect the money because the company's never particularly traded. I can't say any more than that. I can say outside the meeting, if anyone wants details, but I know the Section 151 officer is presumably aware of what I'm talking about. And obviously that relates to loss of income. I would like to know if our internal auditors are aware of any situations that might be like that, which they may not be able to mention now, and how they would.
I was going to say, I'm not
Look at
sure
that.
this is the right place to be
I know
raising this.
The answer is probably not, because we only do sample testing, so we're not aware of all the cases.
Okay. That's fine.
Thank you. Anything further? No? So our recommendation resolves that there's three parts to this, that the update on delivering the 2016-17 audit plan be noted. Sorry?
Yep.
Conclusions and results from completed audit engagements in Appendix 1 be noted. And 3, that the updated status of audit recommendations in Appendix 2 be noted. You noted all those, agreed? Thank you. I think that is the end of tonight's meeting. Thank you very much everybody for all your help. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
And I think this is your last.
Yes, this is my last audit committee, so I'd like to put on record thanks to the chair, the vice chair, and all the other members who've made it. I've enjoyed these audit committees. It's been very constructive and challenging in the right ways. So thank you very much, and also to the committee services which have facilitated the meetings, and of course my colleagues who make all the audit work possible. Actually, because we go out and ask these people questions, and they're very patient and helpful with their time.
Yes, and I would like to put it on record as well. Thank you for your work and your help, and I'm sure it has made a great difference over this last year, so I'd like that formally recorded as well.
Thank you.
We'll agree with that, yes?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'll close the meeting at 8:40. Thank you. I've got to stand I have to move about. Oh, I've signed these, haven't I? Do they tell you to be on the words with that? No,